For this lab, we're working on the distal part of the hind limb, and we're just finishing up the muscles and structures in the distal part of that pelvic limb. And here we have our left detached hind limb of the calf specimen. So here we're looking at this on a cranial view here. So this is cranial, and then this side is going to be lateral. So we'll take a look at this area first, and then we'll kind of move around the limb to look at the structures. So on the calf, it will look different than this portion did in the pony because you have this big fleshy muscle right on the top here that is not what you think it is. So this is actually the Fibularis tertius muscle. So if you remember in the pony, that was almost completely tendinous, but here in the calf, it's very full and fleshy. And so this is Fibularis tertius right on the top. So that's the first thing you want to identify. And then you need to try and separate that out from all these muscles that surround it. So this actually looks like one big muscle belly, but it's actually several. So if you work on the caudal edge and also on the cranial edge, you'll be able to identify some of the other muscles. So the most cranial one, so if you go a little more cranially even, here you can see the differentiation between the cranial tibial muscle and this Fibularis tertius muscle. So you want to differentiate those two muscles. And the cranial tibial is pretty thin actually, and it's right here. So cranial tibial, and you'll see that the calf has 2 extensor retinacula instead of 3. So you've just got these 2 retinacula binding the tendons in place. And then we'll move to the lateral side here and just move to the caudal edge of your Fibularis tertius and lift that up. And you'll look for the long digital extensor. So the long digital extensor you can see here, it may be easier to start distally and then work your way up because they tend to fuse proximally up here. So if you find the tendons, you'll actually see 2 tendons that are part of the long digital extensor, and you'll have 2 heads that correspond with those tendons. So you'll have the lateral head and the medial head. So lateral head will have the tendon that goes more laterally here, and then the medial head will have the medial tendon here. So those 2 tendons extend distally down the limb. So those are both part of the long digital extensor muscle. And then we'll keep going laterally and keep working our way that way. And if you see this muscle right underneath the long digital extensor, this is that cranial tibial muscle, just seeing it from the other side. So this is cranial tibial muscle, and then if you work under the edge of that, you'll be able to find your cranial tibial artery. So this is the cranial tibial artery, and you'll follow that down, and as it crosses the tarsus, it changes names, and it will become the dorsal pedal artery at that point. And then it continues distally, and here we're running into the short digital extensor muscle right here, and it's kind of going through that muscle belly. So you've got those long digital extensor tendons kind of attaching to this short digital extensor muscle here. And if you lift that up, then you can work underneath and hopefully see this dorsal metatarsal artery. So this is just the continuation. It started out as cranial tibial, then it was dorsal pedal, and now it's dorsal metatarsal artery. So follow that down the limb there. And then we'll work towards the lateral side here. So the next muscle you need to identify is actually one that we didn't see in the pony. So this is the Fibularis longus muscle, this kind of triangular shaped muscle with this long tendon, Fibularis longus. And then the one caudal to that is the lateral digital extensor. So the most lateral muscle is the lateral digital extensor. And then that will actually have a tendon that you can follow as well. And that comes down distally and goes right alongside your long digital extensor tendons. So lateral digital extensor and Fibularis longus. So those are the 2 on the lateral side here. Then we also see the cranial branch of your lateral saphenous vein. I know it's not injected, but you can still see it pretty well here. So the lateral saphenous vein will have a caudal branch and a cranial branch. And this cranial branch is the one that's kind of running over the tarsus and is right in your way here. So you'll want to see that in the calf. Then if we turn it a little bit more, The next thing you can see is actually a deep digital flexor muscle. So as you continue caudally, here you're on the lateral side and now you're moving more caudally, and this is the deep digital flexor. And this is actually the lateral head that we're seeing right here mostly, is the lateral head of deep digital flexor, and we'll take a look at the rest of that muscle from the other side in just a moment. But first we're just going to look at the sciatic nerve. So here, I'll reposition just a little bit here. You'll have to reflect your glutiobiceps muscle, and so bring that down but don't cut it off. Hopefully you can keep it attached. And then you'll move up proximally in the limb here, and you'll have this big sciatic nerve. So here, that conjoined part here is the sciatic nerve, and that's coming down and will split into these two main components here. So you've got the fibular, or common fibular, nerve going a little more cranially, and then you have this big tibial nerve right here. So this tibial nerve is the one that goes in between the heads of the gastrocnemius muscle. So that's the muscle we want to look at next. So here you can see the gastrocnemius muscle is here and also here on this side. So you have a lateral head and a medial head to the gastrocnemius muscle. And then kind of running right over here, you have this popliteal lymph node. Right here, it'll be in some fat and fascia. It's kind of attached to that lateral saphenous vein here. That's the popliteal lymph nodes. That'll be kind of in your way, and you want to work around that. And your lateral head of the gastrocnemius then is separated from the medial head by that tibial nerve that we see diving in between the two sides. So on the lateral side, you want to work underneath this glutiobiceps and then transect your lateral head of gastrocnemius proximally and then reflect that. So what we're trying to get to is that superficial digital flexor muscle. And so we saw in the other attached limb how we have the calcanean tendon is this big thick tendon right here. So the gastrocnemius and the superficial digital flexor both have tendons that contribute to this. And if possible, you can kind of work underneath the tendon of the superficial digital flexor and then kind of work proximally. So work your way up and differentiate that from the gastrocnemius muscle as much as possible. And then when you cut that lateral head of the gastrocnemius and reflect it, then you'll be able to see your superficial digital flexor muscle here. So it's very fleshy in the calf versus the pony, which was very tendinous, so you have a lot more muscle belly to it. So here's the superficial digital flexor muscle. Another thing I just want to point out, since it's right here, this tiny little soleus muscle is attaching to this lateral head of the gastrocnemius. It's not important for our dissection purposes, but just so you know, if you do have one, it may be kind of in the way. So that's the soleus. All right, back to our superficial digital flexor muscle here, and then that tendon will go over the hock. So here we're seeing that medial head of the gastrocnemius muscle, and then our tendon of superficial digital flexor. So we have the muscle in between the two heads, and the tendon is extending down here into the calcanean tendon. And then on the medial side, you want to make a cut right alongside that tendon of the superficial digital flexor, and then just slide the tendon off of the hock there and see the calcaneal bursa. So the calcanean bursa right here, or calcaneal bursa, either one, it's right there, that shiny fluid-filled space. And then your superficial digital flexor tendon will continue distally down the limb. All right, so then we'll move a little more to the medial side here. So now we're on the medial view, and we'll take a look at the continuation of that tibial nerve. So we had that tibial nerve going between the two heads of the gastrocnemius. You have that kind of coming out here. And right before the hock, it'll split into a medial and lateral plantar nerve. So on this specimen, you can see that the split is happening right here. You have a lateral plantar nerve that will dive into that tarsal canal. And then you have this medial plantar nerve right here, which I've taken out of the tarsal canal. So if you can imagine that's back in there with the fascia over the top of it. we have the tarsal canal inside, and the flexor retinaculum is that band of fascia, the very thick band of fascia over the tendons and nerves in this area. So to follow this nerve, you just need to cut through that very superficial part of it and kind of pull that nerve out of there. And you'll see the medial plantar nerve, and it will extend distally down the limb. The other side, the lateral plantar nerve, is sometimes hard to follow. So on this one, I didn't follow that as far, but you can see the split here. Then the other thing we need to do is dig out our deep digital flexor tendon out of this tarsal canal. So if you cut through that flexor retinaculum and dig in there, it's very, very thick fascia there, so it's very thick retinaculum that you have to cut through. So if you do that, you can get in there and actually pull this tendon out that's for the deep digital flexor muscle. And here you can see it has those heads that attach to it. So here we saw that lateral head from the other side, but here's that medial side of it right here. We have that caudal tibial portion that attaches in there. And then we have this medial head of the deep digital flexor here. So the medial head will kind of go off on its own and have its own little tendon sheath, and then it will join distally. So after you go through the tarsal canal, just on the distal side of that, you can pull out the tendon and see that this medial tendon attaches to the main mass here. So you've got deep digital flexor tendon there with the attaching medial head coming in there.